Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about a fairly new offering that Crossway has put out, the ESV Chronological Bible. So this is something that I think came out kind of at the end of 2023. I picked it up right at the beginning of this year and have been reading through it for my daily devotions. It is, as you might imagine, a chronological Bible in the ESV English Standard Version. So let me lay out what this book is trying to do, some of its features, and then some of my own thoughts on the project. So this is the text of the English Standard Version, the ESV, laid out in a chronological way. Just a few things to kind of orient you to what this looks like. It's single column it does have verse divisions, but there's no cross references. There's no study notes or textual notes at the bottom. What it does is simply lays out the text in a chronological way, and it divides it into a year's worth of readings. So here's a good example. This is on page 422 of the book, but you can see that in the readings here, this is reading 86, and so it will give you the approximate date range, so 1088 to 1083 BC. This is the stories of Jephthah. It gives you a kind of timeline, so you can see roughly where you are. This stretches from the death of Joseph to Samuel beginning his ministry, and you can see that bubble. We're kind of right there in Samuel's ministry. And then what you have at the beginning of each reading, sorry, I'm a little off screen because I'm trying to show you the book itself. It's more interesting than my face anyways. What you have at the beginning is just sort of a couple sentences, maybe a paragraph, sort of telling you what the reading is about, and then it shows you the text that you're going to be reading. So this is from Judges 10:6 through 12:7. So you've got a couple chapters there with this reading. Some readings can be more, 3-4 chapters. Some are 5 chapters. Some are 2 chapters. But they're all what you could read in a reasonable length of time, and is designed again to be your daily reader that would take you through the whole Bible in the course of a year. So if you've done McShane or other things like that, you're probably looking at 10 to 20 minutes of Bible reading a day would take you through the whole Bible in a year. But of course, the virtue of this structure is that you're going through it not just book by book, but chronologically. So here's a good illustration of what that looks like. The last reading just was from Judges. This reading is from Judges, and it has the book of Ruth as well. So you would read a page or two from Judges, and then the book of Ruth is inserted into the middle of the story of the Judges, because as we know, this took place in the time of the Judges. And so sometimes you'll be doing a reading, and it's just, Genesis 1 through 3. There's no other parallel passages or other things going to that same time period. Other times you'll have readings from 3 or 4 different places that are going on, and so it can vary in terms of what the daily reading experience looks like, but that's kind of what the book is trying to do. Now, a couple of things that this book also does is to kind of build in your mind the timeline of Scripture, and they do this both in how they divide things, but also just visually as well. So when you look at the book, you'll see that on the cover here, at least in the hardcover version, they've got this kind of timeline of colors. When you open this flap, sorry, let me reorient myself a little bit here. When you open this flap, you can see how they kind of have things broken up. So it's patriarchal history from deliverance to inheritance, the last Judges and the united monarchy, the divided monarchy, exile and restoration, the intertestamental period, then this little golden one, the kingdom comes, and down at the bottom, the early church. So you can see here, the Old Testament is taking this whole swath down to here, the New Testament time period. So it's building kind of a visual timeline for you. And when you open up the Bible, the very first thing you see is that same graph fleshed out in more detail and kind of a summary of what is involved in each of these with a timeline as well. This does not give a date to the creation. So you may know, James Ussher and some of these famous chronologies from the early modern period love to kind of try to calculate back and say, what was the date of creation? And some even said, we know what day and what time. The editors of this do not try to do that. They just sort of say, primeval history is before 2166. And so they leave that question of the age of the earth to the side and really begin their dating kind of with the time of Abraham and the patriarchs around 2100 or so of BC down to the early church. So you have a couple of graphics like that kind of woven into the book and the graphic there. At the back of the book, there are a few maps. So kind of your standard, back of the Bible maps, but also, and I'll see if I can unfold this on screen, a much more in-depth timeline that, as you can see, expands out very far and goes into much more depth. That has listed the patriarchs and their dates, the judges of Israel, the kings of Israel, the kings of Judah, and all different kind of key historical events, rulers, things like that. So a great resource if you're just trying to wrap your mind visually around the flow and timeline of the Bible. This Bible will give you some resources to do that. So a couple of things then about this book. So the editor is Andrew Steinmann, who is a Lutheran Old Testament professor, very respected scholar. He's done work on biblical chronology in the past, and he has a book where he tries to kind of argue for his approach to chronology and why he dates things certain ways. This chronological Bible reflects his view. Now, what it doesn't do is explain his view. So if you want to know why he's dating something at a certain point as opposed to another point, you'd have to go to his other work to get that. That, I think, I understand why the editors do that, because you would greatly expand the size of this otherwise. But one thing that I wish perhaps had been done in some way was that there are some things that, especially from a conservative scholarship standpoint, are fairly uncontroversial in terms of, when do you date, the exile or the return from exile, things like that, right? Liberal scholars are going to have a different view than conservative scholars, but within conservative scholarship, the kind of people who are going to be reading and ordering Crossway books, there's some consensus about that. However, there are other things where there's wildly different views. When do you date the Exodus? When do you date the book of Joel? Things like that, where there is a broader range. It's not necessarily as clear. That's something that is not really indicated in here as to why he's taking a view that he is, or that it's a controversial view, perhaps. So that's maybe a weakness that someone who's not familiar with those discussions could read through and just think, yeah, this is the chronology of the Bible and there's no other way of doing it. There's more debate about some of these things than is indicated here. However, I don't have any major issues that I came across. I haven't gone through every page of this to see how he handles every chronological issue, but there's no major issues I'm aware of. It's just, I wish that the fact that there are a broader range of views was somehow noted in the text or the introductions or something like that. However, what you do have here is a good, solid, conservative, scholarly attempt to lay out the Bible chronologically. And there's a couple of ways you can use this resource. The most obvious is kind of how I've been using it. You pick it up and you do a day's reading. One of the things I like about this is that as they broke it up into days, they did not attach a date to it, March 21st or April 3rd or whatever. They just have reading 1, reading 2, reading, all the way down to 365 at the end. I like that because I find for myself, and I've found this for others, that you get caught up in the date, you feel like you're falling behind and you give up, versus just saying, you've done the first reading, go do the second reading. If you miss a day, go do the third reading, right? And just letting the Bible drive it more than the calendar. So I like that. Some people may wish that it was divided more strictly according to the calendar, but that's the way this is laid out. And it's a good way of seeing, the cross-section of things. So here I just pulled up to reading 176, story of Athaliah and Joash. So again, you've got your little timeline, the rough date range that this text is taking place in, a kind of summary of what you're going to read, and then you've got a reading from 2 Kings, and then another from 2 Chronicles. So you can see how each of those histories handles these stories and what's going on at this time period. Where I think the chronological Bible becomes most helpful is when you are reading through the history. So whether it's the historical books of the Old Testament or seeing how those historical books fit into the prophets and things like that, it brings them together, which are typically divided out. So that's very useful. Or in the New Testament, when you get to the book of Acts and the epistles, those are all taking place at the same time, and getting to see, when Colossians is being written or when 1 Corinthians is being written as you're working through the story of the early church is tremendously helpful. So I'm a big fan of this, and you can see how, different books are being written at the same time or different prophets are operating at the same time. So here I just pulled open to reading 258. So you're reading from Zechariah, and you're also reading from Haggai, and then again from Zechariah later on. So you're seeing how Zechariah and Haggai are ministering in the same time period. So it just helps you to see connections and things that you might otherwise not be able to see. Something you can also do in addition to or in place of just reading through the Bible and kind of getting the flow of things is use this as a reference to try and get a sense of what's happening when in the Bible. There's a couple ways you can do that. So one is at the back, first off, they've got a Hebrew calendar, so you can see how that compares the Hebrew calendar, which is its own set of months, compared to the Gregorian calendar that we use in the West today. So that's a useful kind of key. But also, you can just go through and you've got the readings listed out, so you can see what readings are on what day. As you can see, you go through Genesis and some things from Chronicles, some of the genealogies and things, and then you jump, actually not to Exodus, but the next book chronologically would be the book of Job. So you go through Job, then through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's all pretty standard. But as you can see, once you hit the histories, you get into Joshua, melding with Chronicles, and then you get into Judges with Ruth. First Samuel is mixed with part of the Judges. First Samuel, First Chronicles, begins to kind of blend together more. So this is a good way kind of visually of running through and saying, okay, what's going on at the same time period? So you can kind of get that flow by getting this kind of summary overview at the back. Another way that this Bible can be used, and especially as a pastor, I find this helpful, is that you can go through it, not just kind of that overview chronologically, but you can look up a particular text and then see how that fits in with other things. So for example, here they have a scripture index where it's just, Genesis 1:1 through 3:24, 4:1 through 5:32. It walks you all the way through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. And so I could go to any passage and then it'll show me what page that passage is on. So if I'm, preaching through Jeremiah, for example, I could pull up part of Jeremiah's, he's at 1060, and I could flip there and see where is that falling in the timeline. Are there other passages that were written at the same time? And so that's something that could be very useful in your own study or in your own teaching. So for example, this is a great example here. Jeremiah begins here, reading 218. So it's telling me this is kind of written between 629 and 609 BC, and that things that are happening at the same time is not only Jeremiah 1, but 2 Kings 23 through 30 and 2 Chronicles 35. So if I'm preaching through Jeremiah, I can read that and kind of see what else is going on in the story of the Bible in that way. So I think this is a great resource. It's not going to be obviously your daily main Bible, but if you enjoy, just kind of maybe a different approach to Scripture, I think a chronological approach is worth doing. I wouldn't only read this, for years and years and years, but every couple of years maybe, go through it in a chronological way. Use some of the resources, whether it's the kind of summary graphs or the longer timelines or just the kind of list of things in the back to see how Scripture unfolds, what passages are taking place at the same time, where a particular passage that you're studying fits into the bigger timeline. This is a great resource for that. A lot of this is information that you could find in commentaries if you have the commentaries and the time to sort through them. But I think the advantage of this is it just pulls it together in a digestible way. You can go through it as a devotional. You can use it as a study resource. And so I think it has a lot of applications and would encourage you, if this sounds interesting, to pick up a copy of the ESV Chronological Bible.